When we talk about the energy transition, most of the debate tends to orbit around the production infrastructure, so the wind farms, the solar farms, and the battery storage facilities. But it's not just in these isolated pockets on and offshore that the energy transition is unfolding. It's also happening a lot closer to home in something we use every day, which is the transport sector. And this is where the whole energy conversation becomes so personal. It's no longer just about turbines along the coastline that we can see when we're out for a walk. It's also about the car that's on your driveway right now, something that represents freedom, independence, and identity. And that is exactly why the conversation around electric vehicles has become so emotionally charged. In today's episode of CleanTalk, we're stepping right into that tension. Not just entertaining hearsay found on the internet, but talking with somebody who has real credibility in this space. Randall Smith began his career in the Royal Air Force, becoming a senior engineering officer and leading large technical teams across high-stakes environments. He later became program manager for the Jaguar I-PACE, one of the first premium electric vehicles to enter the market. And he's gone on to help scale EV charging infrastructure across the UK. So this conversation today isn't a joust about whether electric vehicles are good or bad. It's more of an exploration of what it looks like to lead under pressure, why misinformation is causing so much havoc in the electrification space, a comparison of competing technologies like batteries and hydrogen technology as it pertains to solving key infrastructure challenges, and an examination of why governments sometimes step in to force change, and why that can make people so uncomfortable. We're going to dive into why negative narratives gain traction a lot faster than technical progress does, why resistance to EVs is often psychological rather than practical, and what it really takes to move this entire industry forward while being heavily publicly scrutinized. If you work in renewable energy, the transport sector, or a combination of the two, this episode aims to help you better understand not just the technologies, but the human dynamics shaping their adoption. Let's get into it. Randall, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Luke.
Randall, let's go back before we kind of build up to where you are now and all you're doing. Take me back to kind of early in your life. What was the path that led to a career in this space?
Well, I've had a sort of varied career across a number of different sectors. I mean, I started off in the Royal Air Force, had a long career in there in aviation engineering, and all my degrees and background come from that sort of field. I left as a senior officer. My last role was chief air engineer for the search and rescue helicopter force. So I had 250 people across 9 locations across 2 countries, 25 helicopters, and Prince William thrown into the mix as well, just to complicate issues. And I had to build up a new organization and take it off in a new direction. And then when I left the Air Force in 2015, I decided I wanted to do something different. I'd done all the crazy stuff in aviation, been around the world, traveled to various lands and done various things in cutting edge aircraft stuff. And I started reaching out to see what other technology was out there and I had a couple of friends in Jaguar Land Rover and I knew they were very cutting edge, and automotive was always fascinated me for a while. So I kind of joined Jaguar Land Rover and I became the PM on the Jaguar I-PACE, which was the first ever electric vehicle from a premium OEM and the first one that JLR had ever done. And took that from concept through to final production. That car went on to win World Car of the Year 2019 and 90 international awards. And then through various iterations, I was rolling out EV charging networks across the Jaguar Land Rover UK retailer network to electrify them to receive the I-PACE because they'd never dealt with an EV before. I did a period of head of UK transformation to improve efficiencies across that retailer network. And then on leaving Jaguar Land Rover, I became an MD for another company to build up an EV charging arm to the business, which was already an established telecoms. I was then a COO for another company that had just been bought out by a major blue chip company to build up an EV charging arm to the business. And then finally moved into 2 other companies where I was a joint CTO, COO, and acting MD for quite a while, of a company that was in renewable energy and another one that was in EV charging, and then taking those forward and bringing those 2 companies together. And it's just been sort of a labor of love through that. And then parallel to all that, I've got my own consultancy company that operates in that space. And I also speak at various venues and conferences and people like yourself, because I have such a passion for the whole renewable energy and EV space and that clean tech environment.
You've been involved in a plethora of different technologies and you've worked with some really large teams in the process. You know, that takes a lot of leadership skill. Mm-hmm. How have you kind of gone from the start of your career, where I'm sure it was a case of learning to manage yourself and your own skill sets, to then, you know, scaling up and dealing with really high stakes environments and large teams?
I think it's a very interesting environment, a very interesting challenge, because a lot of people say, I can easily run a big team. And there's no way you can actually run 250 people by yourself. People say, oh, well, I'll have 250 people answering to me. It doesn't quite work like that. In my military training, you're taught how to lead people. You're taught to be a leader in crisis situations. So if you can imagine in a civilian environment, when something happens, people call the police. But if the proverbial really hits the fan, they call the military out to get it in. So the military are taught to lead in extreme situations. When I was leading 250 across all those locations, 9 locations and 2 countries, you have a sort of hardcore of 10 people answering into you directly. And then you have the sort of chain of command going down. And one of the things I learned was to develop a leadership style, what I call the 3 T's of leadership. So the first one would be trust the individual. So you empower the individual with the tools and the training to get on with the job. And you also create a leader sort of environment so that they can make decisions within a framework. If they have to come back to you every time they need to make a decision, that slows everything down. It quells free thought and it kills everything. So you try and create that. The next one is transparency. So the number of times, particularly when I was at JLR, working on the Jaguar I-PACE, and we had 250 people there across 2 countries, talking to a lot of people, and they didn't realize the importance of the project because we were in a race with the likes of Audi and Porsche and everybody else to be the first premium OEM to make the EV. So a lot of people didn't understand that. But once you start telling them that, so, well, look, the common goal is we're in a race. We want to be the first and everything else. You suddenly see people get the light bulb moment and they think, oh, there's a bit of impetus here. We have to do something. I feel part of something. Yeah. So it's keeping everybody informed up and down the chain of what's going on and where everything's going. Yeah. And the final one is tailored. So the way you respond and I respond and anybody else responds to command will be totally different. So it's understanding the person beyond the 9 to 5 to understand what makes them tick. So I've seen so many times with a manager kicking somebody's proverbial because they're underperforming, failing to realize that the person is dealing with a major personal crisis at home of financial worry or somebody's just died or whatever else. And all you're doing is adding to their problems by chastising them for underperforming. So by understanding the person beyond the 9 to 5, you start ensuring that you can get the best from them. You can start trusting them. They can start trusting you. And all that comes into leading large teams because you go and talk to everybody up and down the chain. I make a habit myself where I get so many people I've seen in the past who have gone, my door's always open if you want to talk to me. And that's great. But the technician on the floor is not going to go and talk to the MD or the COO in his own office. So what I do is I always flip it. I go the other way. And I say, I'll come out to you and I will talk to you in your environment because then you're going to be more comfortable and you're going to talk to me and we're going to talk about football and what do you do on a Saturday night and whatever else. What TV did you watch last night? And people start opening up then and they start saying, well, actually, I've got this problem because I haven't got this tool, which would make it easier to do that. Yeah. So if I can help them, I'll always make sure that I will guarantee that I can help them. If I say I'm going to do something, I'll make sure that I can do that. And when you start doing that in a large team, that reputation swells through the team. So people start trusting you. They want to work for you. They want to, be part of you.
Yeah. Remind me what the first T was?
Trusted.
Trusted.
So tailored to the individual, transparent and trusted.
Okay. You touched there on getting people involved with the mission and kind of see the urgency to what you're trying to do. So like with the automotive story, you're saying we're trying to get here first, or we're trying to be, across the line before other companies are. That's the story. How do you incentivize it for the individual? Because it's great for them to be on board with the vision, but if there's no incentive, then surely there's some conflict.
It depends what their incentive is. When I was in the Air Force, one of my units was underperforming. We had a 97% KPI to keep aircraft on availability all the time. And one of the units was hitting 85% and they just couldn't achieve the target no matter how hard we tried. And their hierarchy was kicking at them and we went down. And I went down to him and I said, what's the problem? And I talked to the technicians and everybody else. And they said, well, we're at 85%. We'll never get 97. They just sort of given up.
Right.
So I sat with them and I said, look, I'll buy you 2 trays of donuts for the team if you can hit 87% and hold it for a month. And they suddenly went, you know, and you could see the thing, because one, there was an incentive, but two, is a case of screwing the boss because we're going to make him buy some stuff for us. And sure enough, they did it. They did 87. And I said, right, let's go for an 89. And they did 89. And then I said, right, you set the target now. And then gradually over time, over a few months, we got them up to 97. They started believing in themselves. The belief in their capabilities came back. So a lot of it is, if you understand the person, it's understanding what makes them tick. What is their incentive? Some people might be incentivized by praise. Other people by reward, you know, take them out for a beer or pizza Friday or donuts or whatever else. Mm-hmm. Some people might want their appraisal to be very, very good, or they might want to take on promotion, or they might. So it's, if you understand the person, it's understanding what makes them tick and what they look for, what they're incentivized for.
So going from the military into the commercial technology space, how did that transition come about? And I guess what unique perspective did you bring as somebody with that really specific and important background?
The military career profile is moving around every 2 years. And that takes a drain on the family after a while. My kids were in boarding school and all the rest of it. And we just decided, my wife and I, now's the time to do it. The search and rescue force were going out of service and everything else. So we took the decision to move and depart. And, you know, it's a bit of a heartfelt because the military becomes a family around you. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. Joining Jaguar Land Rover was interesting because I actually fell into EVs by accident. And it's a bit of a strange one because I was going through a recruiter and applying to Jaguar Land Rover generically. I wasn't applying for any specific job. And apparently your CV goes in, it goes on a carousel, and then they pull you off to see if you're suitable for a job. And I didn't hear anything for quite a while. And one night I was on a webinar and talking to Jaguar Land Rover about various jobs in, I think it was special vehicles or something. And they said, oh, you know, what are you looking for? I said, well, interested in director, senior manager, that sort of thing. And they said, have you got a CV? So I sent it across and they said, oh, good, we'll be in touch. So I told the recruiter that I'd done this and they were going to be in touch. A week later, the recruiter said, you've got an interview, and sent me all this paperwork through for this special vehicles operations. And I thought, well, great. Okay. But then when I went to the interview, I was sat in front of 2 people who were part of a thing called X590, which was the code name for the Jaguar I-PACE. Wow. Didn't know anything about it. Didn't know anything about EVs or anything. So I'm sitting there and I'm asking them all these questions about special vehicle, and they're kind of looking quizzical at me and trying to answer the best they could. And midway through the interview, I said, can I just clarify what job you're interviewing me for? Because I think we've got cross wires here. And I went, oh, you know, PM on the X590. And I said, what's that? And I said, I'm here for this. And I pulled out this job spec. And no. They rushed out and got the job spec for the job and went, no, this is what we're here for. Yeah. So I had to look for it. And they said it was an electric vehicle. I said, well, that sounds interesting. Yeah. And anyway, that was the Friday. And they phoned me up on the Monday and said, if somebody's come that unprepared to an interview, we've got to have you. And that's how I kind of fell into EVs, because I knew nothing about them previously.
Wow.
And then, you know, you bring the skills. So I learned the skills in the military, leadership skills. I honed them through Jaguar Land Rover. I was there for 6 years. And then I applied them through Jaguar Land Rover and into my future jobs as I went through.
Fantastic. So that project management job, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did that involve beyond leading the team of the product? What did that actually look like? Were you on the floor designing?
Basically, we started off with a scrap of paper with the previous CEO put down and said, we need to design an electric car. And it was all brought about because China was one of the biggest markets for JLR, and they were going to start imposing tax credits on these carbon emission vehicles, you know, greenhouse gases, etc. Unless you sold so many zero emission vehicles in your range.
Right.
So the idea was sort of drawn up by the previous CEO to say, well, let's put an idea, 4 wheels, a motor and a battery, and we'll see what we can do. And then we kind of took that and we were squirreled away in Warwick University off-site because it was all very secret. And we started developing that to say, well, how can we make this work? Do we need 4 motors, 1 motor, 2 motors, and how are we going to work it? How big's the battery got to be? And everything was literally designed from the ground up. So we had a whole bank of designers were doing all this. And a lot what we call the top hat section, the doors, the body and everything are pretty standard, but the drivetrain and the battery and everything are all different. And they were building things up from scratch. And you did all the prototype testing and the crash testing. And we got an old car and we bolted a battery on to prove the concept. We were trying to keep it secret, so we didn't really tell anybody. It wasn't on social media. When we built the prototype cars, we used to build them in Witten and then in Warwickshire, and then we drive them across to Gaydon on the test track. And then we worked out that the media used to sit outside the gates because you see the cars in camouflage. They'd photograph the number plate and be able to check what the car was registered as. So we didn't want it to do. So what we did was we registered it as a petrol hybrid. And then we put a couple of exhaust pipes on the back as well. The fact this car drove by totally silent was oblivious to everybody. But we registered petrol hybrid. The social media went mad and said, "What the hell are you doing? Petrol hybrid? What's that for?" And then gradually when it started coming to fruition, we sent it over to Graz in Austria to be built by a company called Magnus Steyr, and the rest was history. But it's a long road. It was a very, very interesting road. I was very privileged to be part of that, to take it from an absolute concept, never been done before, to seeing the car roll off the production line at the other end.
That is fantastic. EVs have had a pretty hard time in the press. What's been your observation about how that's changed, positive and negative influence? What is your take on the media's bias?
I think the main thing is negative news draws clicks. So the media will print negative headlines because they know that's going to draw clicks. And if it's to do with EVs, then so much the better for them. Social media has got a lot to answer for. Why let the truth get in the way of a good rumor? And the problem with social media is you can tell a lie once, it remains a lie. Tell it 1,000 times, it becomes the truth.
Yeah.
And we've seen it before with how fanatical social media can get. With the Nicola Bulley case, the lady who drowned in the river.
What was that?
The Nicola Bulley. So she was a lady that they drowned in the river. They found her body 3 weeks later or something in the river. And there was people scanning the area and all sorts of conspiracy theories coming out. Princess of Wales health scare. People made up their own stories and fanatical and everything else. And it just goes on and on and on. The problem with social media, I think, is a lot of people can make up their own stories and then just put them out on social media. The batteries are always exploding, the collapsing roads. And, that's one that people will go, EVs are so heavy, they're collapsing roads and car parks. And you think they're the same roads that are being used by heavier vans, cars and buses. So your argument just falls flat straight away. Batteries are always exploding. Okay, well, an EV is 20 times less likely to catch fire than a petrol car. But again, why let the truth get in the way of a good rumor? And it's just, it's mind-numbingly crazy. And it's just the area that we live at the moment. I think with the Climate Change Committee in the Lords in February 24 published a report that basically said that the negativity against EVs was now so bad and so ingrained in so many people, it was an issue. Wow. And it was directly affecting the automotive industry itself. And they suggested that the government needed to counteract that in some way. But of course, the government got involved in an election and everything fell flat and all fell apart. But it's a continual fight with the industry, because the industry, we spend a lot of time batting down the rumors that come out and the things, the mistruths, we call it, people making stuff up, and you can bat it down, and then you get a case of whataboutery. So it's like whack-a-mole. Yeah. Somebody comes up and says batteries are exploding, so you prove that wrong, and then it's, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And you just keep dispelling the myths, but then you go and talk to somebody else, and somebody else comes up with all the same myths again, and you dispel those. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I speak at conferences and stuff. And I'll get the same questions coming up. EVs will never catch on. We're being forced to buy them. They're not as green as they make out. There's loads and loads of sayings that people come on. And we spend so much time countering each of those claims that ideally we all need to flip the argument. And rather than saying it won't work because, my military training always taught me to say, let's flip the argument and say, how do we make this work?
How can we make it work? Yeah.
And then push it through like that. You change the mindset from a negative to a positive and push forward like that, because it has to happen.
Yeah. I mean, how can we kind of have a consistent through line in terms of our cultural narrative about EVs when the kind of stakeholders we rely on so heavily to kind of steer the ship are switching in and out constantly?
It's a difficult one to challenge, because social media will make up their own mind, and there'll always be a hardcore of people who will resist change. People are naturally resistant to change. And it's just a fact. They prefer to maintain their status quo and carry on as normal, oblivious to what damage that may be causing. In the case of gas cars, the damaging emissions that cause to the climate and people's health. So there'll be a hardcore that you'll really, really struggle to change. And then there'll be the waverers in the middle who will read social media or a headline, and they'll make their own mind up on it.
Yeah.
And a classic one I remember a while back was the Luton Airport fire, for example. The Luton Airport car park, there was a big fire a few years ago.
Right.
And straight away, social media erupted and said, car, fire, EV, definitely an EV. And everybody went mad about it. And then pictures started coming out showing a diesel car on fire and saying that was the problem. And people pivoted and said, no, it must be a PHEV, a plug-in electric hybrid. That's got a battery. That would have caused the fire. When the final fire report came out, it specifically said the fire was caused by a diesel car and definitely not a battery electric car or a PHEV. And everybody pivoted again and said, well, that's just a cover up by the government, to protect the automotive industry, because it doesn't fit into their negativity agenda. So you're constantly banging your head against a wall, trying to convince people all the time. And what you find is once people step into the EV arena, around 90% say, I don't want to ever go back to petrol and diesel because I realize the benefits, the cheap motoring costs and everything it brings. So sometimes people just need to be taken by the hand and let in. I had a friend of mine for years was saying, never get an electric car, I will never get one, absolute rubbish, batteries exploding, rubbish, cost too much, blah, blah, blah. And then I saw him a few months ago, he's driving a Tesla. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I kind of sat down one night and I realized that it was so much cheaper for me to get an EV because of the running costs and it was better for the planet and everything else.
Yeah.
But for years, he'd argue with me, nope, never going to get it, never going to get it. And sometimes, people just need to see the light.
Yeah. When he did get one, it was he justified it at the time about cost and I guess the maths logic behind it. But then a lot of the time we lie to ourselves about what we're actually, the reason we are or aren't doing something, right? So, mentioning about battery fears, range anxiety, all those things, a lot of the time we think these are what are stopping us, but in reality it's other stuff. And so I guess, how do you get people on board logically with it? As you said, when you show them it makes financial sense or, that kind of thing. How do we open the door to skeptics with truth?
Yeah, I think one of the things I always do when I write articles and I talk to people is I just talk to them to understand what their objections are. And there's no point in getting in an argument or anything or losing your temper with them. I was always taught if you lose your temper, you've lost the battle. So you always keep a clear head about it and just understand where their arguments are. Now, a lot of people will come up and say, I'll never get an EV because it'll never match the 500-mile range of my car. And that's great. But then your bladder's not going to let you drive the full 500-mile range of your car.
Yeah.
So you're going to stop somewhere for a coffee break and a comfort break, plug in and top up your charge. It's as simple as that. And a lot of it is just quelling the fears that people have, because people have a headline awareness of issues.
Yeah.
So they'll understand, Russia and Ukraine and America and Trump and everything else. They'll get all that from the media, and the media very much play onto that. They'll put a headline up and people read that, but when you get into the detail, the story might be slightly different.
Yeah. The most sort of acute or polarizing thing is the only bit they get, and then they form their opinion off of that.
Exactly. So people will make their own opinions up based on what they see or what they hear or what they've talked to the man down the pub with. And a lot of the time, it's just talking to people. I get a lot of people now because of my presence on LinkedIn and because of conferences and stuff, who will DM me, direct message me on LinkedIn and say, hey, listen, can I have your opinions on EVs or something else? Or
Yeah.
renewable energy is another one I get talked about a lot. And they'll say, what is it with the battery? You know, I'm concerned about the health of the battery, you know, and it's going to fail after 3 years because it comes out of warranty and you have to replace it at your own cost. And then you kind of put that into context. I said, well, actually, the battery has an 8-year, 100,000 mile warranty on it. Oh, I didn't realize that. And that guarantees a 70% state of health on it. So, you know, once you put that into context and put them with facts, they suddenly go, well, my mate told me you have to replace the battery after 3 years. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm interested.
Yeah.
But then you start getting into the argument where people will argue with you. And when you put the facts to them, what we're seeing now with the industry is a counter to come up to that, to say, well, you'll say anything because you're trying to protect yourself in the industry. And you sort of, well, I'm just telling you the truth. You know, I've got nothing to gain from it, but I'm in the industry, yes. But I'm trying to tell you the truth to quell your fears.
Yeah. So people come to you on LinkedIn to ask for your advice. I mean, you have a platform. How did you grow your presence as an expert in the electric vehicle space? And why people do you think gravitated towards the content you put out?
I think it took me quite a while on LinkedIn because I started my platform when I was leaving the Air Force in 2015. And as I left Jaguar Land Rover, when I was in Jaguar Land Rover, I ended up with about 900 followers. And I thought Facebook, you know, I thought it was just professional Facebook. But I didn't really think much of it. And I started working with some career coaches as I left Jaguar Land Rover, looking around for other jobs now. And in the space of about 4 years, I suppose I've gone from 900 followers to over 21,000 now. And one of the things you do is you have to get yourself out there. If you imagine LinkedIn has got 1.2 billion users, but only 1% actually do anything on the platform in terms of commenting and liking and posting. So if you get into that 1%, you start getting yourself noticed. And part of it is being consistent in terms of approach. I kind of found the niche that I could write in a certain way, conveying information out and maybe putting a debate out there.
Yeah.
You know, is Britain ready to achieve net zero by 2050? That sort of ask a question. And I started finding that people liked what I had to say and the way I said it as well. I didn't just come out and say, you know, you are to follow this or else or whatever else. And that started growing the following. And then when I spoke on stages and conferences and webinars like this and this sort of stuff, people liked what I had to say, because one of the things you learn in the military is to be able to speak, to convey information and talk comfortably with people. And yeah, it just started growing and people, and one of the things because I have a passion for doing that and talking about, you know, the subjects and everything else, I tend to learn things in depth because a lot of people say, well, I'm an influencer and you could talk and everything else. But when you start probing the depths, they quickly lose credibility because they don't understand what they're talking about. They have that headline awareness. I try and get the depth on it as well, so that when people come to me and talk about batteries, etc., I can say, well, actually, there's an 8-year, 100,000 mile warranty on it. Or if they're talking about renewable energy, the benefits of renewable energy, how we're growing solar and wind energy and battery storage and all that sort of stuff. So by having the depth of knowledge as well, people start feeling confident in talking to you. Because you know your subject, basically. That tends to spread to other people. I get tagged into posts quite a lot on LinkedIn. Randall, what's your thoughts on this? And then that starts growing a following as well and gives you that credibility. And then people like yourself ask me to come along and talk to you about my subject area and my specialization. But it's an interesting area. Influencer, people have called me that. My kids say I can't be an influencer because you can't have a dad who's an influencer. That's not cool, apparently. So my kids call me a specialist. But I know my stuff. I get very passionate about it. I just do what I do, and people seem to enjoy it.
You talked there about asking questions essentially through your content, inviting conversation, which I think is a really important thing. And through doing CleanTalk, I think the one thing I guess one of the main self-development takeaways for me has been that curiosity is about the most important thing that I've found during my career or sort of entrepreneurship so far. Hasn't necessarily been being a whiz at learning things or knowing stuff, but more just having the incentive to go and find out information and like ask the right questions.
Yep.
How have you sharpened your curiosity skills over time?
The internet, basically, and just talking to people. So I go to a lot of industry events and conferences and stuff to understand what other people have to say. And very quickly, there's certain people that will sort of elevate up who you understand and got in-depth knowledge in that. Mm-hmm. And if I've got a query, I can reach out to people and talk to them and say, hey, what's going on about the battery or something, or what's going on about net zero at the moment. I don't know, I just have a thirst for knowledge, and I suppose it's something that developed from my military career as well, to understand geopolitics and the grander scheme of things. When I was working, I was basically working on operations quite heavily. I'm an engineer by background, but I had a lot of skills in engineering, working with the army and stuff. And you take a fascination in geopolitics and how that influences world events. So if we look in the current environment, you've got Trump on one side of the pond, who's anti-EV, anti-renewables. You've got BP and Shell shareholders are pushing people away, the companies away from renewables and back into oil and gas because there's more profit to be made there. The UK government in the middle can't make their mind up whether they're going to achieve net zero or not. Mm. And how that influences the wider world and the wider public and the opinions and that. So I just take a fascination in that sort of stuff and understanding it. And I watch the news every night and think what's going on and how that interfaces and how that's going to influence this market or that perception. And then when you talk to people and they say, well, I saw that on the news last night. Well, EVs are dead or renewable energy is dead. Well, not exactly. We've got to do it because of the bigger picture of what's going on and the reason why, because of global warming, etc. Yeah. So it's, it's a fascinating, it becomes, it's like a hobby, I suppose, in a way for me. It becomes addictive just to understand stuff.
I want to tap more into that kind of curiosity because some people have curiosity, but it doesn't result in them building a following or, being an expert in a given discipline. Looking at your journey of learning more about the EV industry, how do you see the kind of journalistic frame playing into that? Would you consider yourself a journalist? How do you relate to that word?
When I was a kid, I kind of screwed up my education for various reasons, didn't go to university or anything else. And it's only when you get older that you realize the importance of education and learning. Yeah. And when I got into the military, I did both my degrees in my military career and suddenly get a fascination for learning and absorbing more. Yeah. And in the military, I became a specialist. One of my roles was a specialist for unmanned aerial vehicles and combat aircraft for the Ministry of Defense. So I used to go around the world lecturing on that and going to conferences and understanding all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And then I've just sort of carried that learning through into civilian street when I was working with Jaguar Land Rover. And being an engineer by background, you always want to tinker with things. You want to understand how things work, why things work. So when I was a kid, I was taking things apart, which was much to the annoyance of my mother and father. I'd pull the fridge out and take the phone apart and this sort of stuff. But I just had that fascination to try and understand how things work. And when I got motorbikes, I was taking motorbikes apart and then cars and everything else. And then as you get older, the whole world of politics fascinates me, and companies and how things work and the influences things have and the wider environment and how that influences our everyday lives. So, and that's the problem, because a lot of people now, coming back to social media, if you look at something like TikTok or Facebook, everything's very short videos. Yeah. Everybody's got a very short attention span. And that's the problem. People just get a headline awareness of issues, but they don't appreciate the bigger picture of what goes on. Mm-hmm. And if you take that into a company, I always call it, second and third order consequences that we were always taught in the military how to think. So if you put something in now, and for example, if I was leaving the room and I walked through a door and I said, right, I'm going to go through the door. Your first order is to open the door. But in your second order, suppose somebody's coming by as you open the door. So there might be a collision with that person. Third order might be, well, what if that person's carrying a tray of drinks and they spill? So the implications of you just leaving the room all of a sudden have other implications. If you take that to a company, the company say, right, we're going to make a new product and we're going to sell it. We're going to be millionaires. Okay. but do the public want it? Oh yeah, okay, well that's a good idea. Well, let's do some market research and then we can see.
Yeah.
All right, but what about how do we make the product reliable? Because if we don't make it properly, then it's not going to sell and that'll be bad for the company. Oh, okay, well, we'll do some product testing. So it comes back to that mindset I discussed earlier to say, how do we make this happen?
Yeah.
And we put the positivity aspect on it. And you look at the second and third orders. So it's not just making a product and launching it and hoping for the best. Let's try and make it
be strategic.
work. Yeah, strategic, and take that long-term vision, the second and third order outcomes. And every company I've worked for since, you always take that approach to try and how can we make this company better? Because everything is always about making things better. There's always a way of making things better and improving things. And the skill is trying to find what that is. And part of that is understanding the bigger picture, understanding the industry that you're in, understanding the depth of it, understanding how that is influenced by politics or by supply chains or whatever. And once you understand that and bring it all together, then your vision, your strategic vision starts honing up and you can make, credible decisions.
With regard to social media, people are quick to blame, say, oh, it's the government's fault. This is capitalism's fault. This is fault. How do we look at the interplay between, geopolitics, capitalism, and so on in a way that appreciates the nuance? Achieving things like net zero, it's not just a case of everything's downstream from geopolitics necessarily, but some things kind of interplay at the same level. How do you kind of map it out? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, the way I always go into a company and when I talk to people, and I'm, a basic example, I say that we are all blocks of a pyramid. And if you look at a pyramid, it's been around for 4,500 years. So yeah, it's a good example. And the pyramid is formed of blocks. So the CEO, the cleaner, the technicians, the receptionist, all that are all blocks in that pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is the customer. So you got your suppliers at the bottom, the manufacturers in the middle, and the sellers at the top, right? The only way that pyramid holds together and maintains strength is all the blocks pulling together. If those blocks start coming out as individuals, then the pyramid collapses, you lose the customer goes elsewhere, and the business is lost, right? So it's a collaborative effort for everybody to pull together to understand what's going on. If you now take that analogy to a wider context and say we're looking at net zero or moving to EVs or EV charging or renewable energy, there are a lot of players in there that are all blocks in that pyramid that have got to work together. One of the analogies I always see with it is if you look at EVs or renewable energy, for example, you've got the industry players, the manufacturers and the EV charging manufacturers and the people rolling that out and all the supporters trying to support the customer at the top and achieve that target that we're going to make EVs and combat global change. Battering away at the bottom of that pyramid, trying to collapse it, are all the naysayers who say EVs will never work, the batteries are exploding, the roads are collapsing and everything else. So we spend a lot of time fending those off and trying to stop them destroying it whilst we're trying to hold this pyramid together at the top. And it becomes a real big challenge. But I think, and I come back to my analogy when I was talking about the 3 T's earlier, and that transparency bit in the middle is talking to everybody within that pyramid and saying, you are part of this. You are the receptionist. So you're the first person that people meet when they come in. The customer meets when they come in. You are the technician. Without you, the cars won't get fixed, or we can't install solar panels or stuff. Without the supplier, we need you because you order the bits for us to keep the engineers building the stuff and make the company money. With the warranty claims, you deal with the warranty issues because things will invariably go wrong. So everybody has a part to play, and it's trying to talk to people one-to-one to say, you are key. I don't care what your position is, but you are key in this because you do this and that plays into this, this, and this. So it's always trying to
keep communication open.
Keep the communication going and making people feel important and part of that overall strategy, working towards a common goal.
Fantastic. You wanted to talk about hydrogen, and I'd love to learn more about that because it's something I haven't explored very much or researched. Can you, fill me in on what you know about hydrogen and why you're passionate about it?
Hydrogen's a very interesting one. If we look at the whole automotive market, for example, EVs have been around for nearly 200 years. They were invented in...
Let's just stop on that for a moment, because a lot of people don't know or appreciate that. So EVs have been around for how long?
Nearly 200 years.
Wow.
But you want I can talk about EVs, and that'll put a sort of context on it. Okay,
sure.
So EVs have actually been around for about 200 years. They were invented in about 1832 by a guy called Robert Anderson, who invented a shopping cart type thing with 3 wheels on it, lead acid batteries. And in the 1890s, EVs were outselling gas cars by about 10 to 1. The first gas car, I think, was invented in about 1880s by Carl Benz of Mercedes-Benz phase. In the 1890s, we had, and into the early 1900s, we had electric cars, we had electric buses, trucks, vans, everything. And they were really going forward. But then the gas car started taking off for various reasons. Mass production methods came into play with Henry Ford. The electric starter motor was invented, so you didn't have to hand crank the engines as a starter, which made it easier. And they started opening up gas stations along long routes, which made long distance travel possible.
Right.
So EVs started backing down, gas cars started coming forward. And then it's only relatively recently when people started focusing on, hang on, we've got this global warming issue going on, and it's being caused by burning fossil fuels. And if you look at somewhere like the UK, the number one greenhouse gas generator in the UK comes from transport. And if you drill into that, 80% of that is road transport. So you've got to start moving away from it. So this is why EVs started coming to fruition in the last about 30 years. The other thing that came through was the technology caught up with it. So now you can start making better batteries,
right?
Longer ranges, faster charge times, etc. So the battery growth has gone exponential. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're seeing EVs coming up now. When the government is trying to push people towards EVs, they're trying to move people away from using fossil fuels or gas cars and diesel and that towards alternatives. And the alternatives could be electric, hydrogen, and biofuels. Mm-hmm. Biofuels have the problem because they still create emissions, and trying to manufacture them at scale is going to be an issue. Electric is winning the race because electricity is all around us, so it's relatively easy to put in an EV charging supporting network to keep them going.
Yeah.
Hydrogen is a very, very interesting debate because a lot of people sit there and say hydrogen is the next big thing in the next 10 years because all it gives out is water when you go through the process.
Right.
But they miss a lot of the benefits. One of the problems people say, well, hydrogen is one of the most abundant elements on Earth, so why don't we use it? We're stupid not using it. But then you can't just get a big bag and squeeze it out the air and squeeze it into your tank.
Yeah.
You have to put a lot of energy in the front to separate out the molecules, and then more energy to compress it and store it, and then more energy to transport it before you even get it into the vehicle.
Right.
Right. If you look at the efficiency of the vehicles, electric, hydrogen, and gas and that, electric vehicles, if you look at what they call the well to the wheel, so when you generate the electricity to when it actually gets to drive the car forward, is about 70 to 80% efficient.
Right.
Right. So 100% of the energy, 70 to 80% of it gets to the car to drive forward.
Yeah.
As a datum, petrol cars, gas cars are about 20% efficient. Most of the energy is lost in heat coming from the car.
Right.
Hydrogen is only about 30% efficient because so much energy is lost in that initial thing to separate out the molecules and that. It actually takes about 3 times more energy, 2.5, 3 times more energy from that well to the wheel equation to get the hydrogen car going than it does to get an EV. So everybody flips the argument and says, well, if it's renewable energy, green hydrogen made from renewable sources, it doesn't matter. But if I was an investor, do I want to run 3 EVs or 1 hydrogen car? So that's the debate.
Yeah.
So hydrogen transport, whilst it works, it's not very efficient to do it. But hydrogen does have its ventures when you look elsewhere. You can start looking in aviation, for example. And in one of my degrees years ago, we were looking at hydrogen-based aircraft and how they can probably fly. And again, a lot of people will look at it and say, it'll never work in aviation because they think of a conventional tube with a couple of wings sticking out the side of it.
Weight being an issue, is that?
Well, no, not weight. It's weight. If you try and run an aircraft off of batteries, there is a weight issue.
Right.
Hydrogen in aviation has a power to weight ratio because you get a lot of power for what the gas you put in, so to speak.
Yep.
But the problem you then get is the infrastructure to support it. Okay, well, an aircraft flies airport to airport, so you can centralize it in that. So it does have a use in aviation. It does have a use in trucks and buses with heavy vehicles. If you're confined to one area or you're going depot to depot, that was one of the problems with hydrogen cars. There wasn't an infrastructure.
Right.
There was only about 12 public refueling points, which took range anxiety to a whole new level if you were trying to drive a hydrogen car anywhere. So, and that was one of the failings of it. And people argued and said, hydrogen cars are the way forward. Well, there was 2 hydrogen cars for sale in the UK. There still is. And they weren't exactly flying out the showrooms. And if you look, there's about 1.7 million EVs registered in the UK at the moment, but there's only about 300 hydrogen cars.
Wow.
So it's kind of, hydrogen, yeah, it works, but it's not very efficient and you haven't got the supporting infrastructure there.
Fascinating. So on that note then, how much can we diagnose as an engineering problem? So we touched earlier about, the concerns a lot of people have had around EVs have simply been bottlenecks that we needed our industry to be innovating to overcome, which they since have in many ways, particularly with range and things like that. So how much of the hydrogen dilemma is about engineering problems as opposed to, blockades that we can't break through with science?
I think a lot of it is down to physics. There's only so much energy you can get out of the hydrogen, and you can't. One of the challenges is separating out those molecules at the start and doing all that. And there's a lot of energy used in that first part before you even get in the tank. And that is the big bottleneck. And, I come back to the point I said earlier. People say, well, if you use renewable energy, it doesn't matter. But then if I'm creating all that energy, wouldn't it be better used?
Efficiency
driving
still
EVs?
matters, yeah.
It still matters. That's the problem. So until we get over that bottleneck, which isn't going to happen, hydrogen has been around for 60 odd years, I suppose, and they haven't achieved it in 60 years. Nothing's really advanced. And the thing is, people say, oh, when we get over that, they'll be just the same as EVs. But then EVs, the battery technology is growing exponentially all the time. So, whilst if you take a snapshot of EVs now, yeah, hydrogen may well catch up, but then EVs are advancing all the time ahead. But the main challenge is that efficiency thing. So it's not so much an engineering issue, it's a physics-based issue. You can't get over how much energy you need to do to get that hydrogen out of the ground in the first place.
We've touched throughout the conversation on the dilemma of misinformed public, basically, getting information from social media at a very surface level and not really having the information or the tools they need to make informed decisions as a society, really, and the impact that has on the uptake of EVs overall. What stories are we telling ourselves about, who we are, where we're going as a society with technological advancement, and the role of the vehicle to the individual in society? Like, what are the stories that are bottlenecking our ability to change and move forwards, really, as individuals?
I think the big challenge we have is that people fear change. And, people go to Starbucks or Costa and buy the same coffee every day, or they have the same cereal for breakfast because they don't want change. I always like that coffee. I always like that cereal. And they will always do that. And they prefer to maintain their status quo. With petrol and diesel cars, they know petrol and diesel cars. You go to a pump, you fill up, you drive away, and they know, they're familiar with what goes on with that. EVs is a radical change for everybody. It's a different ideology. It's still a car. You still get in it. You still drive it. The only difference is you have to plug it in to charge it up every so often. But because people kind of fear that, and then they hear all the stories on social media, they're worried about that change and making that change. So it's just a case of waylaying those fears and stopping people doing that. I look back and people say, if the government's getting involved, they can't be that good because they're forcing us to buy them.
This is an interesting thing, right? Because when, going back, we were also talking about incentives. And from one perspective, you could say that the way the government is incentivizing the public to take up EVs is through taxation, which is can be seen as a mean incentive.
Yeah.
So how does that play into that?
Well, if you look back, there's times when the government has to make that change and force that change through. If we look back to the introduction of speed limits in the 1960s, I think it was, when the 70 mile an hour speed limit, ultimately that saved lives. And at the time, everybody resisted and went mad about it and said, well, you should let the public decide. We should do it ourselves and everything else. But ultimately, when the government introduced a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit on motorways, it saved lives. When in the 80s, they made the compulsory wearing of seatbelts. Again, people said, we should be able to decide, but ultimately it saved lives. When they banned CFCs, the gases, the carbon fluoride gases, they started repairing the climate and helping that. And ultimately that was for the greater good. Fluoride introduced in water, that was a government decision as well. And that started aiding people's teeth and children's teeth and that. So there are times that the government needs to step in to quell over people's fears of change, to make that change and force that change for the greater good. EVs are the same sort of thing because I said earlier that if you look at somewhere like the UK, greenhouse gases are the issue that cause global warming at the moment. And the carbon dioxide emissions, etc., and carbon monoxide, which comes with greenhouse gases, are all impacting on people's health. If you live near roads or go jogging along a road, you'll taste the gases coming from cars and stuff. So we need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to do something about that. In the UK, the number one greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, 29%, of which 80% comes from road transport. And if you drill into that, 54% comes from cars and taxis. So that's why the government are pushing us to use alternative fuels and stuff. So a lot of it is getting, a lot of people don't get that depth of detail into things. They just make the decision, oh, the government's trying to force us. And I get loads of people coming at me and say, well, the government are forcing us, so therefore it can't be done. You should let the people decide. If we let the people decide, it won't happen. And then we carry on global warming and we carry on killing people and everything else. And I don't want to be the person in, X number of years' time looking back and saying, told you so. Because all those people who are denying it are just going to disappear into the woodwork. And I want to be that person who stood back and said, I tried to do something about it. And I talked with people and I explained the situation, and I want to turn around to my kids and say, this is how I did my part. And we did things for the better good, and try and make things better. And, if you look back at the bigger picture as well, a lot of people go, the carbon emissions have been much higher in the past, in prehistoric times, and they're beneficial for plants and everything else. But if you look back over the last 800,000 years, the carbon emission levels we have now are far higher than anything we've had in the past. The other problem is that the Earth is now populated. Modern man came on the Earth about 300,000 years ago. And the carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution started in 1750 odd have been spiking up and growing ever since. With global warming, you've seen global temperatures rising. And all that is man-made from us burning fossil fuels and coal and gas and oil and that sort of stuff. So we need to do something about it. All the science is there, all the facts are there. We just need to get on and do it. And all these deniers that are stopping it happening, one day, hopefully they'll realize that what we're saying is actually we're trying to do something for the greater good.
It's clear that you have a lot of kind of passion and conviction behind what you say. Obviously, your career trajectory, I guess, over your career trajectory, like how have you become invested in the products and the stories behind them? Because obviously, getting into the EV space, you'll get better educated about the importance of climate and climate change and global warming and the rate of those processes. How integral to you are these values? Is it something that that's developed throughout your career, or do you feel like you came out the womb ready to save the planet?
It's something that's developed throughout my career. I come back, I'm an engineer by trade, so I like to understand how things work and everything else. And I always get into the detail of things so I fully understand something. In aviation, I can tell you how aircraft operate, how they design, how the structure, how they operate, performance and everything else, and what, the different levels of atmosphere and how things operate. When I got into EVs with Jaguar Land Rover, I took a lot of time to understand what EVs were about, and then why we're moving to EVs. Yeah. And then when people started resisting EVs, why was that? And then I'd counter that and say, well, you're saying X, Y, Z is bad, but then when I study it, you're not quite telling the truth. So you get this sort of conflict in your head to say, why are you saying it's bad when actually the information is telling me it's good. So I started understanding all that and getting into it. When I started doing EV charging, you start understanding about how the grid works and the bigger picture of how the distribution of energy comes and where our energy sources come from and how all that operates. And then you start looking at the commercial aspect of when you sell energy and how you price it and how you install it in the street, in a public environment or someone's home. And then you start looking at renewable energy as well. And you say, well, how does that work? How does a solar cell work? How does that create energy, electricity to feed into a battery? How does a battery work? And it all just comes down to that. So when I understand stuff like that and people approach me on LinkedIn and say, can I have a chat with you sometime? And I'll have a Teams chat with them or I'll meet them over a coffee. And they'll say, well, I want to get solar cells, but what is it all about? What do I need? And I explain to them all the diagrams and how battery cells work and how battery storage is beneficial to you. And it's just a sort of passion to understand everything. And then the wider context comes in about the geopolitics I was saying earlier and how Trump's decision on tariffs is influencing China and how that influences us and all that comes through and how that affects businesses in the UK and how that affects companies then and when we're building through. So it's just a fascination that I do. I just love that sort of stuff and I get involved with it. And companies, it's interesting because companies seem to like that then when I come into a company because I've got for want of a better word, I seem to have a platform because I've got so many followers on social media, on LinkedIn, for example. And then I get up on stage and it comes up and says, Randall Tiny Smith, COO, MD of such and such a company. And that gives them a platform. And I've got a huge contact list, for want of a better thing. Excuse me. A lot of people who are connected to me are in the industry themselves, in the renewable and the EV space. And I can call on them and talk to them about if I've got an issue or a challenge or I don't quite understand something. And companies seem to find that very, very beneficial when you have someone like me coming through with that sort of passion to say, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's got a passion for it. He can drive the company forward. He has a certain leadership style to understand people, to take them forward. And hopefully, I can help people out. I will.
Randall, thanks for sharing so much about your career and your insights. I find it inspiring when someone's not just passionate, but there's real depth of knowledge behind that passion as well. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to jump now to what we call Quickfire Curiosity, which is our short trivia to end the episode with. First question of which being, what does futurism mean to you?
I think it's pretty much what we discussed earlier. It's looking into the future and trying to predict where industry is going and what is going to happen in the future. If we look at something like EVs, batteries are changing all the time and where that's going to go. And I sort of look at that technology and say, well, do we need a battery that will do 1,000 miles between charges when most people are satisfied with a battery that does 500 miles? So why don't we cut the battery in half, do 500 miles? That reduces the weight of the car, reduces the cost of the car, makes it just as efficient. So it's trying to look into the future to see where something will go. And I'd like to think of myself as that sort of futurist, sort of looking person.
An optimist almost.
An optimist, yeah. See the best in things and how we can improve things. There's always a way of making things better. And the skill is finding what that way is. And I always try and make that work.
Fantastic. If you were to speak to your younger self, you mentioned you didn't have the best start in education in your early years. If you had 30 seconds to give that young person some advice, what would you say?
I think the first thing I'd say is believe in yourself. Things are always better, and believe in yourself and always keep pushing. And I always have a saying now that if you can't go through the front door, then go around the side and kick out some windows and find an alternative way in. And just keep pushing and keep looking for a way, because there's always a way of achieving something. May not be the easiest route, but just keep going and believe in yourself because the capability is there. Just keep pushing and keep going.
For people that are at a critical juncture in their career, looking for a change, or maybe they're coming in and out of a piece of like a portion of education, what advice would you give them on asking the right questions to spot the best opportunities for them?
So if they're looking to come into the renewable energy sort of clean tech and environment, EVs, that I think have a look around and understand what it is you're going into. There's plenty of information on YouTube, read the media, the mainstream media, the BBC, that sort of stuff, and just talk to people to understand what it is you're trying to get into. And then go to industry events and go to shows and conferences and talk to the people on the stands to understand what it is they do and understand what the products are that you're trying to get into. And then start talking to them and saying, well, listen, I'm trying to get into this space. What advice could you give me? And everybody will come up. Talk to recruiters as well, because recruiters have got a vision from their side of the fence, and talk to them and say, I'm really interested in getting into the renewable energy space, the clean tech space. What advice could you give me? What qualifications do I need? Where can I start? And they'll give you advice, or reach out to people like myself on LinkedIn and just talk to me, and I can sort of advise you and say, well, if you want to get into EV charging, these are the qualifications you need. If you want EVs, this is the company you need. Renewable energy, this is the sort of areas you need to look at. But you've got to look at it, if you look at the bigger picture, it's a growing arena. It's moving forward. We've got to combat this global change, this climate change, etc. Battery technology is growing exponentially, so that is getting faster and faster. And then looking into the future, where is transport going to go? Driverless cars? Could we get into alternative energies? Could nuclear become a thing for cars in the future? So it's a growing arena, and it's going to be a fascinating arena. Very much worthwhile getting into it.
Brilliant. Randall, thank you so much for joining us on CleanTalk today. Where can people go if they want to reach out to you to learn about the EV space, or just find other business opportunities with yourself?
They can find me on LinkedIn. So my name is Randall Tiny Smith on LinkedIn. Tiny because I'm 6'7" and ex-military rugby player. But if they look me up on LinkedIn, send me a DM, just connect to me. I'm more than happy to have a chat with them. I'll answer any DMs. I'm always on there. I can have a Teams chat with them if they want, or even meet up for a coffee. I'm more than happy to help.
Fantastic. And you run a consultancy as well, is that right?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So the consultancy sort of sits across renewable energy, EV charging, and EVs. And I've worked in various sectors with America, finance firms getting into battery recycling, Indian firm getting into EV buses, Saudi firm getting into solar. And I've worked across a number of different sectors in that sort of environment. And again, people sort of see stuff that I write, or they see me talking at shows, and they say, listen, can you help us out with this, that, and the other? And yeah, again, I solve problems and I help people with that, and I can advise accordingly. So
brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for listening in to today's episode of CleanTalk. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, you can click the link to my right. And if you want to learn more about Harmer Visuals and how we can support you with your storytelling and communications objectives, head over to harmervisuals.com/services to learn more there. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.